Hey, Ray.
Hello there, Jennifer.
Hi, everyone that's joining us on LinkedIn. Thanks for tuning in. And I'm just so excited. Ray and I have worked together, as many of you know, but not everybody. And not everybody that's tuning in even knows, Ray, about your work and about the Better Man movement. And so that's what we're here to talk about today. And the conference we are all very excited about, which is November 2nd, which will be here before we know it. And so we're going to dive into some details about that. But first of all, Ray, where are you joining from? You're just talking about
I'm
coast.
in Fairfax, California, which is
Uh,
north of San Francisco by about 18 miles in Marin County,
hmm,
where the mountain bike was invented.
neat. Nice. Good. So that says a lot about the priorities and lifestyle of your area.
Mine, anyway.
Yes, yes. Well, everybody who knows me knows I'm a New York City resident, Manhattan resident, no less, and dabble a bit in trying to get out of the city to enjoy nature for all of its properties, healing properties. So, Ray, I know we're going to talk about, if we have time today, really talk about the way we restore,
Yeah.
given, I know, the intensity of this work, the importance of this work, the stakes of this work, and having been in it for quite a while, as both of us have been in different realms, but now kind of coming together for the purpose of supporting male leaders and what that looks like. And there is exhaustion happening. There is fatigue happening for all of us, all kinds of individuals for all kinds of reasons. So we'll talk about that and how it's showing up for us too, individually, which should be interesting. But first of all, so Ray, let's talk about quickly the conference and give a little history on how it started and what's coming up and who goes and what it's for, and just kind of level set for those folks who are joining us for the first time that don't know, and who attends and what happens there. I know I've been in the room with you many times, and I've also been virtual, but there's nothing like being in the room, and we're able to actually have an in-room and hybrid virtual audience coming up in November 2nd. So there's so many different ways folks can participate, and I hope we get the biggest audience we've ever gotten.
Yes.
Yeah. So what would you like to share?
Well, lots of prompts in your invitation. So I think the first thing I want to speak to is, and you and I have talked about this before, is I just want to celebrate our partnership with JBC being an expert shop in I call it broad-based diversity, equity, and inclusion, and us being a shop that focuses on engaging, activating, educating the male side of the house, those that
Mm,
identify as male because they have all the power, position, and privilege. After acting like partners for a number of years, here we are officially as partners. And the reason I say that officially is because we announced this, and I came up with this kooky idea. So for this year's conference, when June appeared to be too soon for New York, I was sitting by myself and I realized, I've done a couple of virtual keynotes where the Jumbotron was on a stage and there was a bunch of live people in the audience and there was a virtual audience. And I know, Jen, you've done some. Why not? And hopefully I'm not going to have an answer to this question. Why not do one conference live in New York, live in San Francisco, with Jennifer holding the stage in New York with half of the facilitators and me holding the stage in San Francisco, so
mm,
that everyone except the virtual audience only is going to have a live experience.
mm,
Listen live. And so when I threw this out, people have really been liking it. I found out that technologically we can do it.
mhm,
So that's kind of the logistical, technological frame up for this year.
mhm,
Um, how this conference got started was uh, I was invited to a number of women's only leadership type conferences, PBWC, Watermark, other versions, and I'd be speaking to an audience, mainly women. In fact, there was rarely was there a man in the audience, and it occurred to me that after having led 50 plus men's weekends where I was only working with men, working with them to get out of their head and into their heart and to be healthy, masculine, men in their roles as husbands, fathers, leaders, and friends, that maybe somebody should put together a conference where it would put the attention and intention on the men. And so I reached out to some friends at Genentech and Price Waterhouse and several other large companies and said, I've got this idea. I want to advance healthy masculinity into the leadership conversation. Will you back me? The answer was yes. And that was 2016. And this was pre-Me Too, pre-Time's Up, pre-Black Lives Matter movement, pre-COVID. So here's what's exciting and different. Now, because of all those events, they've created a perfect storm, which is shining the light on the majority, men. So those men, of which I, from a place of positive intent, believe they do care. They care about their families, their peers, their colleagues, their work, respect, business. They don't know what to do. So when I wrote my most recent book, Showing Up, How Men Can Become Effective Allies in the Workplace, part of my thrust was to help them with, what do I do? Then there's the DEI practitioners, many of whom attend your calls and who I've met, and sitting in the question, how do I engage and activate these men? I wrote to them. So the conference focuses on them too. And then everybody else who doesn't identify as male, who comes from a historically marginalized group, how can they support and be supported? So this year, like in years past, with an intersectional lens, we're going to be delivering a conference in November that's going to have kind of a workshop feel, and we're going to take a crack at patriarchy, power, and privilege. And rather than, and this is what I invite everybody who's watching or listening now or in the recorded version, a lot of times when people hear those words, they cringe. Patriarchy, privilege. What's that? I mean, does that mean something's wrong with me? Or power? Whatever the case is, we're going to take a positive slant. What might positive patriarchy look like? What might using privilege for good look like? What might a reexamination and a recalibration of power look like? So we're going to be looking at that. So I'll stop there. And I think I got the who, the what. The participation. Last question. Who attends? Everybody's invited. This is an inclusive conference, but at the end of the day, everyone from a individual contributor all the way up to C-suite, men, women, non-binary.
Love it. That answers a question that we have in the comments, actually, Ray, about are all male identified individuals welcome? Are all individuals welcome? Yes. But just to answer the question, so that everybody here can picture this audience, virtual or otherwise, it's probably majority heterosexual, majority cisgender, majority male identified, and some ethnic diversity as well. And there's sort of this amazing mix of all of that.
Yes.
But who it's typically, you'll see a preponderance of that community, because it is one of the rare spaces, one of the only spaces I've ever seen a group that identifies that way, that is making the time to come and spend a day learning about power, patriarchy, privilege, right? Examining their own journey, examining their own, perhaps even, fragility. And I don't say that in a negative way, just that changing in the way that we're being asked to change and step in triggers a lot of things for us. And, depending on how we've experienced the system and whether that system has worked for us and was built for us with us in mind, this can be a challenging space. And how loving of a space, Ray, I have, witnessed and been a part of creating that container where people can come, and I'm hoping not get more tense, but actually relax and breathe together and be in community together and realize I'm not doing this alone. I don't have to do this alone. I want more. I expect more from myself.
Yes.
I want to show up differently. I want to go on this journey. And that's, if I could summarize the energy as somebody who identifies as cisgender woman, and my pronouns are she, her, hers, and I'm also in the LGBTQ community. The feeling it's an amazing feeling to be in this room, because it is so rare to see and to feel that intent, and to see that intent in the form that it takes at this conference. I wish it were happening all the time, but it's not. And it needs to obviously be more widespread, but at least we have folks for a day, and at least we can dive into some of these themes and really help these leaders. My passion is to help these leaders evolve and step into the opportunity of allyship and solidarity at a time, like you just referenced, Ray, where there's a discomfort, there's a fear, there's a hesitation, do I matter? How can I make a contribution? What if I say the wrong thing? All of those things, I think, are the static and the noise that's preventing folks from really doing what we all need them to do, specifically from that place of power, patriarchy, and privilege. So, I know you and I both are trying to close that gap. We're trying to say, hey, like, here's the bridge, and this conference is part of that bridge.
So in light of, you touched upon a couple of the categories I call the 5 states of men that I write about in my book. So I'm realizing I want to make an invitation to each category. So and talking to hundreds and hundreds of men, reading emails, talking to diversity, equity, inclusion professionals, I began to recognize that there's these 5 states of men that exist in most, if not all, organizations. So if you are a man that feels threatened by diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts, or even feel that all this attention on white men is a distraction, come to the conference. You'll learn that the privilege that you may be tempted to demonize may be able to be flipped, and you might be able to see it as an advantage. And I'm going to assume positive intent that you all may be able to shift, and then ask yourself the question, how do I want to be experienced by others? So that's the first category. There's another category of men that if you are at your company and you're sitting there saying to yourself, well, there's an ERG, employee resource group, or BRG for women, LGBTQIA, Latin, people, BIPOC, and you're wondering, well, how come there isn't one for me? And you feel excluded, come to the conference, because we'll help you flip that feeling, that temporary feeling of exclusion, because you may not know it, but this is how other people feel. And it's an easy shift. The third group, the ones you all that might be afraid to say or do the wrong thing, so you do nothing. We don't want that. That signals complicity. So having logged 15,000 plus hours and working with men, we can support you in having a different relationship with your fear and to keep going. The next group are the ones, and I like these guys too, you want to know what to do, but you don't know what to do. So come to the conference and learn. And then last but not least, the allies in training. You all might be the ones that kind of get it or think you get it a lot. And by the way, there's more to get. If you come to the conference, you're going to learn, and you might be able to kind of step into some of your teaching and mentoring to support others around you. Because as Jen said earlier, this is not something we do alone. So I just wanted to just give a little infomercial invitation to all those men, and to everybody else who I didn't speak to. We need you there.
Oh, I love the way you just put that. That's beautiful. And then the themes of power, patriarchy, and privilege. Ray, I know we both, in partnering on this, we wanted to really get deeper than we have in the past, and really have this conference equip folks with some tangible, concrete frameworks, skills, tips, practice, opportunity to reflect, make it just really, really meaty, rather than perhaps, and I'm not knocking this format, but often conferences will be kind of expert after expert after expert. So somebody asked, who's on the planning committee and who's going to be on the stage. And we've really worked hard to get as many diversity dimensions and identities represented, both in our small team that's putting the agenda together, and also several consultants from my team who identify as members of the LGBTQ plus community, who identify as Latinx, Black, queer. So we've actually looked at this to make sure that we are having that intersectional, like you said, Ray, lens on every piece of the agenda, so that we talk about it from multiple places, and that we have different messengers, and not just the message, but really paying attention to the messengers, because that diversity is important to both of us too. And sometimes people will hear things differently when they're expressed by different humans in different packages. And I'm keenly aware of my, my gender identity and expression as it presents in a room full of, largely majority male leaders. It's something I'm always really interested in, my own experience and process of my relationship to power in a conversation about power in a room full of folks who are perhaps used to power defined in a certain way. And so we can get really, really meta here and, talk about that, how that feels. Because, and I think we give voice in the room, Ray, to as many different identities as we can, and as many different definitions of their experience of power, patriarchy, and privilege, from those who have it, from those who, have a different form of it, from those who have not had it and struggled against it, with it, in themselves, in others. So I feel like we look at this like this, through so many different prisms, because these themes are really, I mean, I cannot imagine a more important arena to explore, because like you said, if this goes through your head, you belong in this room, because there is a community that's wrestling with the same things. And as a community, we have to lead. Like we need to come together, because as people who care about redefining power, about utilizing privilege in a different way, about, dismantling the harmful effects of patriarchy and redefining them. And I love that this is an intersectional group that's going after that together, and that we get to be, part of that, because that's fundamentally the work that has to happen.
Just in listening to you, Jen, as a member of the dominant group with all the privileges, white, male, cisgendered, heterosexual, I'm 6'3.5". I even got the tall guy privilege. My part of my role is to model. What does the power of vulnerability look like? What does sharing power or decentering myself and centering others look like? That's a whole different relationship with power. Because otherwise, if I just went asleep and my ego drove the bus, I'd be out there, hey, I'm the founder of the conference. Everybody look at me. No, it's not what it's about. It's not what it's about. It's kind of like, and here's a tie into positive patriarchy. When you're a father or a mother, little kids are watching everything you say and do, and everything you don't say and you don't do. So how I interact with adults, how I see them, value them, respect them, include them, it's not that far away from being a parent. And personally, if I can stay in my heart and be an inclusive, white cisgendered guy, and everyone who is around the table deserves to be there and gets to be there, that's a good thing. That's a good thing.
It is. It is. I think that the lack of visible role modeling of behavior and language and commitment, and like failing forward in public, which is part of this work. It is literally, reaching out. It is going beyond your comfort. It's taking risks. It is not knowing this, not having a script. Yeah. And really finding, I think, a new language, particularly generationally. Ray, you and I are the same generation, and we're one of many generations in the workplace today. And there's an overabundance of senior leaders in our age cohort, although that's changing. And so every move that a senior leader makes really matters. It's watched, it is emulated. Good, bad, and different. Silence, speaks volumes. It's a missed opportunity sometimes. So I think that when we have this precious time with this audience who's dedicated and looking to build their skills and their comfort with a very uncomfortable proposition, which is that, hey, by the way, you're going to need to lead in a different way. You have to show up in a different way. And the old way is not going to work. And we're here to talk about what that new way is. And you will find, reassuring them, I think, that like you will find there's a bigger community, behind you that's moving in the same direction. But it can be so, I guess, lonely or isolating to feel you are one voice, perhaps on a team that never ever speaks about this, or in an organization where there is no commitment. So it heartens me actually sometimes, everybody, if you haven't been to one of these conferences where you'll see a table, like literally delegations from different companies. And what's neat about that, Ray, and also unique, I think, is that this is a group they are accountability buddies. They are coming together. They're attending together. They're learning together. They're going to follow up and debrief and share. And I love being able to look out over this room and virtually to see that certain companies are represented that have always been a part of your conversation, or maybe there's new ones too. So I wondered if you could name drop a bit of who has joined us in the past and sending delegations of leaders. And yes, accompanied by others in the organization too. There's often those who come along as a coach, come along as a mentor, come along as a support. And I notice all of that too. But tell me a little bit about the companies that have been really dedicated to this and have always had a presence. And maybe there are some new entrants into the mix too that I don't even know about yet.
So companies that have been along for the ride for a long period of time have been PwC. And PwC, they signed the he for she pledge to have 80,000 of their men sign up and be part of that. And they realized they needed content and expertise. And when we were starting to roll out the Better Man Conference and Healthy Masculinity, it was like the new ice cream stand on the corner. So they've been involved for quite some time. Same with Intel. And to Intel's credit, Intel announced, I think last year, that it's their intention to have 40% of their senior leadership positions filled by women. Cisco's been involved for a long time. Oracle's been involved for a long time. Sony, talked to Hewlett Packard this morning. eBay, Unilever hosted in New Jersey one time. Blue Shield. So a whole host of companies have been involved. And when I first started the conference, it was about gender. And along the way, we developed the 4 steps of the ally's journey. And it dawned on me that those 4, those 4 steps of the ally's journey support anyone who wants to be an ally to anyone. So anybody can come and benefit from the conference. Michael asked a question earlier, do we embrace and include transgender men and gay men? And the answer is yes. And on our community calls and past conferences, we've had healthy masculinity conversations with both gay and transgender men because they have their version of what that is. And at the end of the day, this all comes back to the majority, which is men in charge, which predominantly still until it changes is white. So at the end of the day, if I could educate or have one of the end results be that those white male men in positions of leadership begin to understand even more so their position, their power, their privilege, and their opportunity as a human to include everybody. And I mean everybody. That's a huge win, right? And for everyone there who doesn't identify as a man to see, you talked about how amazing the conference is. I'd like to think it represents what's possible. Better yet, what's eventual. It's eventual. And so, as long as I can talk to people like you and show up at the conference, that's going to be my end game.
Eventual. I like that.
Yeah.
Ray, you and I are always, we're working in a way with the majority, but also at the margins.
Yes.
A different kind of margin than we normally talk about. We talk about, underrepresented individuals at the margins, but this is another group at the margins in a very different way, not from a power, patriarchy, and privilege perspective, but certainly from an involvement perspective in this conversation, that are not in not leaning in, not understanding how to do that, not practicing, holding back, afraid. I think perfectionism, and sort of, if I could take a page from, the white supremacy playbook, leading in a way that is safe and according to the playbook, which is, I need to know all the answers, right? I can't show up as imperfect or questioning. I can't show up from behind and in service of, and so I think this is part of, I think, what we're going after is really questioning the norms that have elevated certain leaders over others, that have celebrated and recognized certain attributes and encouraged that in our organizations, such that we don't see a lot of certain kinds of diversity in leadership in so many companies. We are here, right? We're here. This is our current state. And that diversity of all kinds doesn't make it through and up that pipeline, because it's an arduous journey. It's a journey through microaggressions. It's a journey through toxic workplaces. It's a journey through sexism, homophobia, power and patriarchy run amok and completely unexamined. And so when we get leaders in this room to examine it, to look at it in ourselves and in the systems that we work in, I like to think, people leave feeling changed and feeling grounded in something different, and feeling, at the same time, yes, I'm on a frontier and my own growth, but I know I can lean. I know who I can lean on. I know what I can hang my hat on. I know what I believe. And I know that there's a community that's striving. Like you said, eventually the workplace will look very different. And my message always to leaders like these is, let's get on board. And if we keep our head in the sand, if we pay no attention, if we think it's not our issue, our opportunity, if we don't think we can evolve, then please, come to this conference, because we must evolve. All of us must evolve. And I think you and I have a point of view, and everybody that's going to be in this room has a point of view, that the evolution towards belonging, towards inclusiveness is the direction that we need to go in, especially to capture the hearts and minds of the next generation. And, to not engage with that, I think is not a winning strategy, but some have chosen to remain on the sidelines. So, I know you and I write books about this, to say, hey, like, this is not eating your spinach. This is actually core to your continued viability and relevance, not just as a leader in an organizational system, but as a human, as a parent, as a sibling, as a family member, as a loved one. This is core to our evolution, so it's really the energy of the invitation. And I want it to be the safest place that folks have experienced on this topic, up until that moment. I mean, isn't that a beautiful goal?
It is. It is. The word out of everything you just said, safest. In order for that to happen, it requires a nuanced intention and follow through to meet men where they are or aren't. Okay. And so, devoid of shame and blame. That's absolutely critical. And, I see in the comments that, Sylvia has a question of, what are the consequences of not leading with DEI? Well, if I'm a man and I choose not to embrace, incorporate, align with DEI, and I choose to resist, it's not a matter of if, it's a matter of when that I won't be followed. And what that might look like is those around me who don't feel included, they'll leave, or they won't bring their whole self to work, and the team, and then ultimately your leadership, will suffer. Now, I can only say that from a man's perspective, because that's what I extol when I speak to guys, And then Richard's got a question here. What's been my experience in changing the hearts and minds of men in very conservative states? So here's the deal on that. There's I've already told you 5 states of men, but there's also 3 groups of people who we want to focus on. There's the laggards, the learners, and the leaders. Credit given to Chuck Shelton, Jennifer and I's friend. The laggards, we don't spend a lot of time and energy on them. We don't try and convince, but the learners and the leaders, that's where we put our efforts. Now, with that said, when I spoke to earlier, that group, that state of men that feel threatened, not threatened, but yeah, threatened by DEI, I still want to find a way to meet them where they're at and give them a chance to be listened to, but then very quickly educate them so they can make a new choice. And so maybe, because I've had a couple of extreme right wing individuals that I've been in conversation with, yeah, and we've found some middle ground, and that's not where the change is really going to happen.
Yeah. I also say, and hey, Rich, nice to see you. The, it's sort of, I know we say bring your full self to work, but I do wonder whether the expectation of leaders in an organization needs to align to the values of the organization. So what we believe perhaps may not be aligned, but when we show up in an organizational context, the commitment is to foster that sense of belonging and inclusiveness, so that everyone can feel comfortable bringing their best contribution. So I do think too that there is an interesting difference between maybe beliefs, personal beliefs and practices, and what our obligation is to further the goals of the organization we may work with. And I think people, Ray, get so stuck in this agree disagree binary. I feel like that's like where we spend so much time. And it's like, it's not about agree disagree. To me, this is a leadership skill. Inclusiveness is a tool. It's another tool. It's a really important tool. I would say one of the most important tools in a professional person's toolbox. And it can be learned. We're putting aside agree disagree. All the questions I always get about, well, Jennifer, if I say they, them, I just feel I'm such a grammatically correct person. I don't like saying that, and again, it's agree, disagree with somebody's identity, with how somebody wants to be called. We just have to stop ourselves for a minute and say, this is not about agree, disagree. This is about being a part of a system that is ideally, hopefully, changing to meet a diversifying workforce and a diversifying world. It is literally like shifting this in ourselves and learning this different language to build trust, to build collaboration so that people feel the psychological safety they need to produce and to give their best. And if that means I'm misgendered every day and I've shared my pronouns and they're ignored, or there doesn't seem to be any weight given to who I am and all of who I am, to me, that's not a smart strategy. I mean, you can do it, but you're going to end up with a workforce that is continuing to be homogeneous, that is continuing to sort of repel all of that brilliance that exists in a truly diverse in every way workforce, and I don't know how you can afford to leave that innovation behind. That is our lifeblood. If we don't have that, our organizations they're not able to pivot and grow and evolve and anticipate. So, I think just practically speaking, the moral argument's tricky and you go down this, rabbit hole of agree, disagree, you go down all of that. But I do wonder about how we might enlist folks, regardless of that, to agree at least that how the organization needs to look in terms of the context that it exists in. And that's not changing. That's not going back to the 1950s, 60s, 70s, 80s. We actually need to be pivoting ahead of the changes that are ahead. We need to be prepared. It's not even like reacting to, it's preparing for and preparing ourselves. And I think this is exciting. I mean, some people is it intimidating? Is change intimidating? Is any new habit hard at the beginning? Yes. But I think that we sort of stop before we start.
So, Jen, when you talked about agree, disagree, here's what it prompted in me. And this is something that I teach and I write about. And it's listening from the head, binary, versus listening from the heart. And listening from the head is agree, disagree, win, lose, validate,
Mm.
all those kinds of things. Okay. As allies and leaders, that's not what we're looking for. So, what's the context? I can be trite and say it's not about me and it's about we. So, in the context of being a leader, the question I invite anyone, and not just leaders, to think about is how do you want to be experienced by other people? If you start to try and win, agree, disagree, guess who you're making it about? You're making it about you.
Mm.
And there it is. It's not about me, it's about we. So that's the temptation. So this offer is to get curious, seek to understand, even with those right-wing individuals that, you know, trolled me on the internet and said all these things. I still tried to talk to them because I
Mm.
wanted to understand, what are the values that are driving you? Is there a middle ground? I exhibited a willingness to do that, and I'd like to think that all of us can do that. So rather than agreeing or disagreeing, hit pause. Don't make it about you for a moment. It's not about winning. It's about connecting and relating and doing your part as a human being to have other people feel included. That's the game.
Mm. Mhm, mhm. Agreed. I mean, Ray, what you're describing is really the definition of allyship. It is being steered by the needs of others for support. And where privilege comes in, everybody that's listening, power, patriarchy, and privilege is something I'm redefining these days. And a lot of us are starting to talk about it as something that can be deployed, something that can be unleashed,
Yeah.
that can be useful, and something that can level an unequal playing field through the sharing of power, the definition of power in a different way. So when people are afraid to step in and do something and they don't know what the something is, I think honestly, privilege should move from something we were afraid to talk about and ever address to something that we utilize on a constant basis. And in doing that, sharing how we're utilizing it, sharing what we were able to accomplish in solidarity with, being steered, taking that tool and not making assumptions about how it should be utilized, but doing a whole lot of, you said, listening, and consulting, asking, being steered by others is a whole new way of leading. Again, like back to super uncomfortable, I know, because it requires us to kind of leap outside of the frameworks of what has worked for us. But if we can listen, learn, be guided, and know when we need to guide, that whole, it's really this interesting nuance of, we get this question a lot, Ray, in the room, like, when do I step in? When do I step forward? When do I step back? When do I step to the side and make room? This is the question we explore in the room, because sometimes we are needed to role model and show what it sounds like and looks like. But many other times we need to share whatever platform, access, permission we have, and draw attention to something else and someone else's lived experience, someone else. Make sure that person is at the table, make sure that person is heard, make sure there's follow-up. So it's an interesting thing of pivoting, moving around constantly, and being really sort of emotionally intelligent about what is needed from me right in this moment. Am I needed? Is someone else needed? Is somebody else's voice needed? And I know, Ray, you've, in planning a conference so many years, you ask this constantly. Am I needed? Am I on the stage right now? Who else is needed? Who else needs to, be in front of this group? And there's this whole kind of dynamic of something. And I know, like, what this is like, because I founded my company, but I always think about how the collective wisdom of this group is so amazing, and we all do our thing in our own way. And I love the opportunity to sit back and listen and be the learner, because I think expertise doesn't just live with one of us, and it doesn't just live with the person who's planning this, and you and I know this, and I know we believe this, but this is in organizations. How can we bring that kind of thinking in?
For everyone listening and watching, the little cheat sheet on, and you touched upon almost every point, um, that I learned when I got my knuckles slapped when I was coming up through MKP on my way to becoming a leader. Because I'd be on a weekend and there'd be 40 staff men, and we'd have circles and meetings, and then there'd be the 40 men that came. So there was always an opportunity, or the opportunity was this: does something need to be said? Does it need to be said by me? That's an important one.
Mhm,
Need to be
mhm.
said by me. And if I'm going to say something, towards what end, and then how can I pop out?
Yeah.
So if you pass through all those stages, then you'll know if something needs to be said. And if for some reason you don't have the position, the voice, whatever the case may be, then that's where an ally can come in. And that's where the raising the awareness of a male ally, knowing that it's harder for women to insert their voice when a bunch of guys are, you know, crowding the microphone. So what can I do using my privilege and my position and my power to make space?
Hear, 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 hear. I wish we had more time, Ray. And there's some questions we haven't had a chance to get to. I apologize in the comments. You can always follow up with us here, like via direct message, Ray. I'm going to offer you up and myself as well.
Yeah.
For things that we didn't have time to necessarily get into, because these are deeper conversations that are come to the conference. You know, that's a great answer. But Ray, the conference is November 4th, as you pointed out earlier. For those
November 2nd, November 2nd,
right, November 2nd,
November 2nd,
New York and San Francisco, live and virtual.
Yeah. And if you go to www.bettermanconference.com, you can sign up for our newsletter, because you're on Jen's newsletter as well. We're always making announcements. We're going to be doing a 3-part series, Jen and I, with some of the speakers, doing a drill down on each of those themes: power, patriarchy, and privilege. So that's coming. And, you know, if you like what you heard today and you're curious, a lot of companies send a delegation. They send 5, 10, 15, 20 people, live or virtual or combination. We can help you put something together. And if your company is just a little further along and you want to be part of the narrative and demonstrate to your stakeholders and the rest of your company how important this is, talk to us, because we're open for sponsorship still.
Yeah, that's a great point, everybody. So there's no one answer or right answer about where you need to be in your journey. And there may not be any appetite in your organization for even knowing what this is, let alone, Ray, as you and I know, there's fear to even have the conversation, let alone send one person to something like this, let alone send a group. So companies like Cisco, Intel, the others that Ray mentioned are now, after many years, really comfortable, like, you know, putting this out there and saying, this is a priority for us. It's a way to develop our leaders. It's important to us. We sponsor, we send folks. But I would really encourage, if there's even an inkling of interest, and even if there's not in your organization, I almost feel like send a scout to this and begin, because I think if you build it, folks will appear. It's like there is a want and an appetite and a hunger for this conversation. You just may not know it in your organization. It may not have ever been articulated. It's one of those things that I think is happens sometimes with DEIB work, which is somebody will say, well, we don't have issues here, or we don't really need ERGs. And I'll say, build it and they will come. There is a need. There is a need. And you just have to know that, you know, and that's why you work with experts, right? To say, like, look, there are struggles going on with belonging in your workplace. We can guarantee it. It's just that there's no workplace that doesn't struggle. There are struggles going on around allyship. And we know that this is true. So, you know, if you're listening to this and you're wondering, how would I ever broach this with my organization? Like, please reach out to us, because really we live not just for the long tenured organizations that have been having this conversation forever, but the ones that are just dipping a toe. That's so important to work with and pull that thread and encourage and foster, because one thing can turn into 2, can turn into 10, can turn into an internal conversation that's never been had before. And that's, I think, brings us so much fulfillment and joy, because, Ray, like you say, this is an eventuality, but it's slow to get started. And I wish it were accelerating. And I think that's the way each of us can accelerate it in the system that we're in, is by bringing this up, we're raising it, by, you know, offering it, and just a virtual attendance. I mean, even if that's like that baby step that you can take, everybody, I would really recommend you make an investment and take a look around, see how it feels, and give us feedback.
There's one thing I just realized. A lot of these questions, if you go to showingupbook.com and you order my book, it allows you to register for a free virtual ticket. And in the book, towards the end, I write to, what if I'm only one person in an org, and that this is important to me. because at the end there's a chapter for DEI professionals. What does the multi-year game plan look like? But what if you're at a company and that doesn't exist, but this is important to you? So there's some strategies in there, and a lot of the answers to a lot of questions, both voiced and not voiced today, are in there. So it's a great tool. And a quick little shout out to Mark Green. I saw you chime in there, Mark. Mark's going to be, I think, our first guest for our first series in August. We don't know the date yet, but that'll be, well, I'll let you know soon.
Yeah.
So, Jennifer,
hi, Mark. Thank you for your work. I know we're out of time, everybody, but please continue to stay tuned. Like Ray said, we're going to have a bunch of these leading up, and we're going to introduce our wonderful speakers like Mark and others who are on my team. We're so excited for this this format. Ray, thank you for showing up, standing up, role modeling, giving me hope and inspiration for the fight, because it's hard some days and lonely some days, but I know that help is all around, and we just need to know how and where to plug into it. And I hope that I see everybody that tuned in today, at least in a virtual attendance, if not joining folks in person, because now we can, if you're comfortable doing that. There's nothing like that on this topic in particular.
Yeah.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you, Ray. Be safe.
Bye-bye.